I think the first thing that I was really interested in just asking you about personally from listening to interviews and stuff was you had told this story about how you were fighting with your ex-wife and you were walking outside or something and thinking that you were going to go nuclear on her.
Hmm.
And that you said when you thought that you had this feeling that there, maybe not a literal belief, but a feeling that there would be nuclear war on the planet if you were to go nuclear on her.
Hmm.
And when I heard that, it just hit me really hard because I haven't heard a lot of people talk about things like that, and it's something that I've experienced things like that, and in a really intense way that I don't really know what to do with that feeling. This feeling that like the whole exterior world is almost a reflection of some internal process or something,
Hmm.
and that I almost feel just so intimately responsible in a way for like everything that's happening. And not always in a literal way, but sometimes it does feel really literal and direct. Like I'll see maybe a homeless man that looks very deranged and suffering and, talking to himself. And I just feel like, oh, that's a part of me that's stuck in that spot that maybe I can't handle it. So I project it on into the outside world or something. And I guess what I wanted to like get your perspective on is, and maybe I'm taking it into a whole different realm that you weren't really implying, but if I am hitting on something that you have also felt, like what do you do with that feeling and how do you not allow it to basically make you feel paralyzed or totally overwhelmed where you can
Yeah.
still feel like you can move forward and provide some service to the world that can help uh I don't know. I think you know what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get at. How do you not
Yeah.
allow it to just totally overwhelm you, I guess?
I haven't thought about that moment for a long time, but as you describe that story, it's coming back to me. I remember I was so mad at her, and I had every good reason to be mad. I had every justification to go to war. She did this, she did that, she yelled at me or whatever it was. I don't remember exactly what it was. I just remember how mad I was.
Yeah.
And going out, I left the house. I was walking around and around the neighborhood, and I was going through this fantasy in my head of, I'm just, like you said, I'm going to go nuclear. I'm going to put her in the realm of enemy and just let loose. And that was the moment. It was like, I guess it was the thought that if I do that to somebody I really love, then what hope is there that who was it at the time? George Bush and Vladimir Putin aren't going to do that to each other. What am I affirming about the world if I just let loose in, I don't care what happens, total destruction mindset?
Yeah.
I'm actually proclaiming something about the world and about human nature, about human beings. It's kind of a prayer almost. And so, yeah, it's irrational. Like, I can't think of a causal mechanism by which my decision, which probably would have ended up in divorce court, et cetera, there's no causal mechanism by which that decision would engender nuclear war. But there's this gut feeling that our choices are significant beyond the effects that we can actually see. The principle of morphic resonance, Rupert Sheldrake's idea
Yep.
that any change that happens in one place generates a field of change that influences the entire planet or the entire cosmos. And so that would have been a pretty intense change to stop trying to make peace and to just let loose. And here we are today, where a few days ago it was looking like there's going to be a war in the Middle East escalating into World War III. And there was no reason to think that that wouldn't happen. Yet it hasn't happened. And now it's looking like it probably won't happen.
Mm.
Why? Because there are there are powerful forces at work behind the scenes that want there to be a war, and it isn't working. They're
Yeah.
not able to do it. Could it be because of all of the choices that you and I and so many other people have made to hold peace? Are we actually holding the world, if not in peace, at least away from a total conflagration?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe. We don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. So it definitely sounds like the way you're describing it is much more um, sort of digestible, I guess, in a way that makes me feel not quite so overwhelmed, like I think what I've felt at times is more of a literal, direct, like more than a prayer to the extent of like I'm living. I don't want to get too far out right away, but why not? Like I'm living in a dream and the exterior world is this reflection of the self that's sort of speaking to me, and showing me things about myself that maybe I haven't integrated or that I'm not willing to look at. And I would imagine you've experienced a state like this. Um, and in that sense, like when you look at the things that are still happening, I've been listening to your climate book, and it's great, by the way. I'm really enjoying it. I'm about 9 chapters in.
Mhm.
So, like, if you think about something like deforestation that's still happening, and I'm not trying to say like any one of us as individuals is directly responsible for it, but if we're gonna do it like just a mental exercise or whatever, have you had times where you think, have you ever felt or thought, what is it about me that's allowing this to still continue? Like, where am I still, you know, do you get what I'm trying to say
Yeah,
here?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we don't have to go to like a direct causal relationship between, oh, my thoughts or my unconscious stories are causing deforestation to happen.
Yeah.
But we can look for the correlate. Like what in what way am I uh, raising, destroying, uprooting, leveling parts of my world or even of myself
Mm.
in order to achieve some short-term gain. What beings am I sacrificing in my personal ambition, my personal pursuit of progress?
Yep.
These deforestation invites questions like that.
Yep.
Um, and also just on a very practical level, like how is the way that I live depending on deforestation?
Yeah.
Why is the deforestation happening on a visible level? Yeah, maybe it's to produce commodities, produce lumber, to dig strip mines. I don't know. Depends where the forest deforestation is happening, and not to go to the place of guilt.
Yeah.
I'm doing a bad thing, but just to understand what is the matrix of relationships that I'm part of. How do I resonate with it? How do I not resonate with it? Where do I feel uncomfortable? And like I said, how do I do that in my life? And what's ready to change?
Yeah.
How am I? Because once that, it's almost like the deforestation is doing me the service of bringing something to light that would otherwise be under the surface.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, okay, this is coming up in me right now. And am I ready to stop doing that? What is the next, um, what's the organic next step for me that this, what has become visible, has made apparent or has readied me for?
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, some of those feelings come from, well, one, just sort of a new understanding of reality and, your sort of the story of interbeing, I think plays into that, where when you do feel like everything is connected, when you experience everything to be connected, ultimately you do you can't take yourself out of the current reality, right? You can't it becomes a situation where you can't blame anyone anymore, right? And so, not that I was ever a big blamer to begin with, but I think my sort of last line of things to blame was like, which I also think you can maybe relate to some of this given some of your things I've heard from you. But military industrial complex, elites, new world order, that sort of stuff, like that kind of seems like the breakthrough point
Mhm.
is your last thing is when you start to realize all these global synchronized conspiracy things and it's like, well, that's the problem. It's these guys. It's the Federal Reserve. And if we were just to end that, then everything would be good, you know?
Yeah.
And kind of really even taking that and going, well, that's a part of me too. And there's a reason, these people aren't to blame. They're just part of this whole thing as well. And so when I had nothing left to blame, then it sort of almost I went to war on myself, I think, in some ways. Well, then it must be me. It must be my fault. And there must be something that I can change about myself, And I still have some of that. But do you feel like that's sort of a natural progression in some ways?
Yes. Yep. That is a natural progression. You go from one enemy to the next until you come to the enemy that is all encompassing, like a nefarious, diabolical power that controls the entire planet.
Yep.
And then, as you're saying, then you turn that inward. And it's still the same pattern, though. You're still looking for an enemy, and there's a certain comfort in that. The
Hmm.
comfort in identifying an enemy is that then you know what to do and you know what to do and you know how to do it because it's a fight. You can use the familiar methodology of fighting, which could be to expose them, to blame them, to in some way take them down, to foment popular fury against them, to expose the truth. It's all part of a crusade. And then, yes, that can get turned inward to exposing to yourself the bad parts of yourself and confessing and turning over a new leaf and making commitments and being held accountable and having someone call you on your shit and like setting all this up, finding allies in the war against these bad things in yourself.
Yeah.
So there's a certain comfort in that because it's familiar territory. To let go of that is really uncomfortable because
Yeah.
then you don't know what to do anymore. You can't necessarily even explain why the bad things in the world are happening. If they're not happening because of bad people, whether or not that includes yourself, if they're not happening because of bad people, then why are they happening? Like there's
Yeah.
this blank unknowing that is part of the territory that you have to go through in order to come to actual knowledge. The fake knowledge has to be cleared away before you can come to real knowledge. And the familiar patterns of action that are actually part of the problem have to be cleared away before you can be actually effective in changing the world. Otherwise, I mean, really, why is the world the way that it is right now? It's because of war, it's because of fighting. Even issues that seem to have nothing to do with warfare would be easy to solve if we weren't expending so much of our energy trying to overcome the other side. If we were in unison, then none of the planet's problems would be very difficult to solve.
Yeah.
They're all socially generated. So this is actually the progression you're talking about is a really good step to go into the space of I have no idea why the world is the way it is, and I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
That opens the door to unimagined power and understanding.
So, one of the things I think of when, as I hear you say that stuff is, like when you think about the literal level of changing, behavior or actions to try to affect uh, global change. Like, let's say I'm gonna quit buying plastic, or I'm gonna stop, like controlling yourself to stop certain types of consumption. Well, that stuff, or whatever it might be, I'm gonna stop driving. I'm gonna stop. I don't think maybe it's not a either or, but I'm wondering what you think of like. does it really sometimes does it matter as much if I say don't drive a car, but I still am internally like warfaring on myself? Like maybe I still want to drive a car, but I'm forcing myself not to do it because I think it's better, or I'm still snapping at my partner or my kids, or you know what I mean? Like you're still have the psychic sort of energy of a internal warfare, but you're restricting yourself from certain activities to try to.
Right. Yeah. Control is kind of another form of warfare, a more muted form. How do you stop yourself from doing these things like driving a car? Like, what's actually going on in your mind? Are you rewarding yourself psychologically by granting yourself approval, acceptance, if you do not drive a car, and hating on yourself if you are driving a car or shopping or doing some bad thing? That campaign of approval and rejection, conditional approval and rejection, is the same energy in a more dilute form that takes its extreme form in warfare, where you completely demonize the other side to make them into the enemy. So this conditional approval and rejection, you're kind of setting up sides. And the 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 result of that is that you end up doing the things that allow yourself to approve of yourself, whether or not those things are actually helping the situation on Earth. I don't think that it actually does much good for individuals to just simply try to drive less when we are embedded in a built environment that pretty much requires us to drive all the time.
Yeah.
You can cut down a little bit, but if you want to really stop driving, then you have to remove yourself from probably wherever in Minnesota that you are,
Hmm.
and go join an intentional community somewhere, or live in a dense urban environment, which comes along with all of its own problems. And is the solution for everybody to move to an intentional community and build an entire new environment and leave suburbia to rot? Maybe it is. I don't think so. But we come again to actually, I don't know what to do, which
Yeah.
is a good place to come. So, yeah, I don't think that. I mean, there might be other reasons to drive less, um, but don't do it just so that you get to count yourself within the ranks of the good people.
Hmm.
Because if by doing that, you're counting other people in the ranks of the bad people, and you're going to be a walking transmitter of judgmentality and sanctimoniousness.
Well, part of what made me feel that way and I want to, bring that up was I do live in the city. I live in Minneapolis, and I'm increasingly not wanting to live in the city. And I have a great friend who's kind of a spiritual mentor to me in a sense. He's a bit older than me, and he's just a very wise person, and I really have a lot of love for him. And I've been sort of in a space between stories, I would say, in my life over the past handful of months, and it's been extremely challenging, probably one of the most challenging periods of my life. And I've been really isolated in a city full of tons of people. And for me, like, yesterday I drove 50 minutes out of the city to be at his house with him. And just that, it changed my perspective on the day. It changed my energy. I felt more loved and connected and part of something bigger than myself. And it just made me think about, what would have been better in that scenario if I were to not drive, and maybe I wouldn't have, participated in something that is probably bad for the environment, but then alone and isolated and felt disconnected and suffering and all of these different negative thoughts and feelings, or to go and maybe drive a little bit, but I get to experience like what life is maybe supposed to be like, and nourish myself and move more towards this space of being, really connected and intimate with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who knows what the effect will be of having a relationship with this mentor that requires that you drive sometimes. Who knows what the effect will be on your grandchildren?
Yeah.
What kind of person will it help forge you into that becomes a certain kind of parent and a certain kind of grandparent? And who will those grandchildren become because you've had this this mentoring relationship? And what are they going to do in the world? And what about their grandchildren? Do we really know how this planet evolves, this society evolves? Um, what what makes somebody into a person of influence? Like what are the conditions that allow somebody to change the world? Um, it may be because they had a good grandparent. So if we don't understand, this is the question that comes up. If we don't really understand what the effect of our choices is going to be in in the big picture, how do we make choices?
Yeah.
Here's another comforting fallback, which is, well, I'll make choices based on the math. I'll add up the carbon footprint of every possible alternative, and that's how I will choose, or the ethical footprint, or something like that. And then I will be able to make rational choices. I don't think that that's a good way to make choices. It leaves out all of the things that we can't measure, that we can't predict, that we don't understand. And so we're really basing choices, if we try to make choices on an ethical calculus, we're basing them on a biased data set. And the bias in particular leaves out the things that may actually be the most important, because the things that are left out of the current dominant worldview are precisely the things that we need to bring back into our reality. Therefore, we have to make choices on some other basis besides the calculable, predictable, measurable impacts of those choices. What is that other basis? If not the calculating mind, if not the rational mind, what is the other basis? And here we get into other organs of the body, um, the heart, the gut, the feet.
Yeah.
What if you decide you were going to make every choice by putting your bare feet onto the earth? Maybe that doesn't work in the winter in Minnesota, but I find that when I do that, I get new information, and I want to do different things than I do if I am immersed in a digital reality. So that's just an example of what we need to bring in. And maybe you put your bare feet on the earth, and an option that you hadn't even realized was available comes to you.
Mm.
Or an option that seemed like the only alternative now seems like ridiculous. Why would I do that? Like, this is the kind of information we have to bring back in.
Yeah, and how much do you feel like that sort of rational mind and polarized thinking of trying to, kind of argue between two sides within yourself, or not necessarily even two sides, but do that math sort of, so to say, and like you're saying, how much of that do you feel like is a way that a method we use to kind of protect ourselves from a lot of built up pain and trauma and grief that we have not been able to express. Like for me, I guess I've been feeling lately like I've realized through various different processes that my mind and my thinking parts of me have been like a protection mechanism that I've used to keep myself in my head and prevent myself from really connecting with my body and maybe my intuitive parts of me, my heart, because there's so much pain that's been trapped in there since I was a small child from just various countless different things. My parents got divorced, so on and so forth. That I almost became a stranger to myself, that my own feelings were so foreign and intense that I wasn't didn't feel safe to even to weep, to grieve, you know.
Mhm.
And how common do you think that is, and how much do you feel that that is, you know, a big part of this whole problem and a process that we're about to need to all undergo, you know, some more than others, is this sort of reconnection and experiencing this built up grief and trauma of the planet, ourselves, our families, our ancestors, all of that, this
Well,
sort of like a well of pain, I guess.
certainly, intellectualizing things and going into the headspace can be a way to avoid feeling.
Yeah.
It's not. I hope that nobody thinks that I'm saying that we should never make rational decisions or that the
Right.
mind is a bad thing.
Mm.
Um, the mind is a fun thing. It is one of our digestive organs that tries to make sense of experiences. I don't think that it should usually be the organ of choosing things, but more of digesting information, which then it communicates to the heart in digested form to inform the decisions that the heart makes. And in order for the heart to make accurate decisions, it also needs to digest the painful, traumatic experiences that you're talking about. If those are so, if the mind is taking over and not allowing these other um, forms of other ways of being to be experienced, then you're also operating on a partial data set in your heart. So
Mm.
to fully experience grief over a loss, that's an important component of the ground from which the heart can choose wisely. If that has not been digested through the grief process, then you're going to be operating as if loss were not real.
Mm.
If, yeah, and this goes for other emotions as well. They need to be integrated in so that you can be fully in reality. Like celebration. If you don't, like the counterpart of grief is celebration. To really allow joy in, to celebrate it. If you don't do that, you're going to be, again, operating on a partial heart data set
Yeah.
that doesn't include um, possibility, that doesn't include how amazing and joyful life can be. A lot of people are not playing with a full deck in that regard as well.
And so that's what makes me ask, like, how much do you think that fuels this search for substitutes and um, sort of fuels our way of being as like overconsumption and you know what I mean? Because if we're not open enough to fully experience the all the feelings that come with even if you have friends and family that you're connected with, but you can't fully open your heart and experience that love and the intimacy, you
Well,
know.
yeah, so addictions and overconsumption can, those are part of the maintenance program
Mm,
to maintain the separate compartments that are necessary when you don't fully take in the grief, the
mm,
fear, the anger, the joy, the celebration. You have to maintain separate compartments in your psyche, and it takes work to maintain those. So addictions help that maintenance because every time you really start to go into the despair or the loneliness or the grief, you know, have a drink or buy something on Amazon or divert yourself in some way. Um, yeah, so that's the relationship between um, addiction and uh, unprocessed grief or
yeah.
unprocessed joy.
Yeah. What made me think of that is at one point in your book you told a story about seeing some birds with your dad, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And your dad told you about how many more birds there used to be and how you cried. over sort of the lack of life or the and you mentioned that how long it took you to sort of reconnect with that part of yourself that could really weep and feel that sort of thing. I'm wondering what that process was like for you. Was there a period of your life where you sort of you know, something that sort of maybe broke you open and or were you always somewhat connected with that sort of
No,
the ability to weep and
no. I'm still not that connected with it.
no,
No, my programming to not show any vulnerable emotions is pretty strong.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, I've definitely recovered some
hmm
of it, but yeah, I'm eh, not necessarily a highly evolved person in this respect.
well, it's hard. I mean, it's been years and years since I've cried, and I think I've cried more in the past 4 months than I have in the other 30 years combined, I think.
Yeah.
And luckily I've had, a couple people that could just hold me while I cry and not tell me it's going to be all right necessarily
Hmm.
or say anything, just be there so I can just feel it.
Yeah.
Um, and it just surprises me how terrifying it can be just to feel grief or despair.
Hmm.
Um, Mostly because I think I've lived my whole life feeling like it's not okay to feel that. And that if I were to allow myself to feel it, it might just never end, or I might
Hmm.
not come out the other side, or get trapped into something. And um, I guess I'm just, you know, I have a feeling that that's something that is I see it around me more and more, and I feel like it's something that people are going through and needing to go through because of all the things that have happened culturally and individually that probably haven't been felt and dealt with. And I guess I'm just wondering if you see that too, and how we can, you know, hold space for each other through that, because do you feel like this move from the old story to the new story, as you put it, the story of separation to the story of interbeing, a necessary part of that movement is this sort of breaking open experience and, really coming in contact with this grief, among other various feelings?
Yeah.
I guess not to interrupt your thought process. I guess just to add a little extra on there is when I'm listening to your book, part of what I'm feeling is, the whole carbon stuff and the all of that stuff that people are arguing about, even the climate change argument in general, much of what you're saying to me, it feels like, yeah, it feels like it's a distraction from just seeing the horror and feeling the pain of what's happening. And that if we were able to feel it, then we would naturally want to change the things that we're doing.
Hmm. Yeah. The story of separation can only be maintained by shutting out most of reality. The story of separation being I mean, you're familiar with that term, but
Yeah.
basically, for those who might be listening,
Yeah.
it's the story that says that who you are is a separate self in a world of other that operates by mathematical physical laws, um, in which each of these separate selves is seeking to maximize its own self-interest, um, and that basically says that the world outside of ourselves is a dead mechanical thing, populated by living beings, but without the qualities of a self. That's what the story of separation says. And for that, for anyone to believe that, you have to be in a very walled off existence, cut off from the other beings who are actually part of yourself in what I call the new story, which is also an ancient story. We're not actually separate. And you can't even have a full existence outside of relationship. And with each relationship that is sundered, your beingness shrinks. And with each new relationship to humans and to other beings, to place and to soil and to the sights and sounds around you, like all of these other beings, the birds, the plants, you grow, you become more as you recover more of your true self, which is interconnected. And so this recovery process requires bringing back in the things that have been shut out. And that can be a very emotional process, because when you bring those things in, you come back to full reality. And for example, then the reality of loss comes up, like it did for me when my father told me about the passenger pigeons that had gone extinct. That brought a reality of loss into my being. The reality was there before, but I hadn't integrated it. Grief is the process of integrating the truth of loss. And why does that hurt? It's because the being that's lost is part of ourselves. So yeah, to be in a state of interbeing, to embrace the full connected self does require that we go through grief, and many, many other ways to reconnect. Like the reconnection, the healing process is a recovery of all of the lost parts, all of the shut out and repressed parts of ourselves and of our capacities that become available when we occupy a more full self.
Yeah. This is a little bit of a turn of a left turn here, but it's something that I was curious about because I've never heard you speak about this in relation to this story of interbeing. I've heard you talk a little bit about, it sounds like you're pretty close with your ex-wife's husband. He's a pretty close friend of yours, and I've heard you talk about singing songs with your ex-wife, and it sounds like there's still a connection there and a good quality relationship. And so I've been hearing more stuff about conscious uncoupling and various different, people are being public about quote unquote breakups or divorces, but still having connections and sharing love and all of this. And I guess I'm just sort of wondering if you have thoughts or feelings about, or maybe what it looks like for you of, the difference in the story, the difference of endings of intimate partnerships or even transitions of intimate partnerships and how that looks in the new story, because I'm curious for different reasons, partially because it's some of things I'm experiencing in my own life. But, the old story to me is a lot of, you're attracted to somebody, you're with them. If it's not working out, you usually hate each other towards the end or get very mad at each other. You break it off and sometimes act like, the other person doesn't exist anymore and you never talk to him again. And it seems like there's some shifting happening in that sort of stuff. I'm just curious if you had any thoughts on it
Yeah.
or feelings about that.
Yeah. We've been apart for 15 years now, almost. Um, I have noticed a change in society. Back when we broke up, it was very unusual to have amicable or even loving relations with your ex. The norm was you both hire a lawyer and you duke it out. And, you exchange the children on visiting times or whatever. And there's the drop off point, and, you don't even talk to each other, get in the car, they go out of one car into the other or whatever. Um, and you become enemies, or at best, like you're polite. And, Patsy and Glenn just spent Christmas with us. They came for Thanksgiving too, actually. Um, There we we all accept each other as core family, and that is, I feel, no longer unusual. I mean, still there's a lot of people duking it out in divorce court, and running stories about how horrible that other person is. But I'm seeing more and more former spouses with the kind of relationship that Patsy and I have. I would like to say that it's becoming the new normal. I mean, it's still, still a long way to go, a lot of work to be done. It brings up a lot in people to navigate these breakups.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. I mean, every conditioned pattern of blame and judgment is evoked by um, breakups of intimate relationships. Everything that's hidden within you gets flushed to the surface as far as judgmentality and assumptions and blaming and blind spots and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You get to see who you really are in those circumstances. See parts of yourself that would not otherwise be easily seen. So there's a lot still. Um, but now, whereas before, if you're going through a breakup and you go talk to a friend, the friend would take your side. That was what a friend was supposed to do. Take your side and like, yeah, that was inexcusable what she did. And, but now there are enough people who will say, well, have you looked at that? You know, maybe what she's saying has a grain of truth in it. And there are enough people who understand friendship not as you take your friend's side in the war, but who see a friend as an ally in your in your spiritual growth, your evolution.
Yep.
And in friendship, because you trust me, I'm going to tell you, here's what I'm seeing. Um, which doesn't necessarily, oh, you're just as bad as she is, but it could be, um, about boundaries and about manipulation, or I mean, there's all kinds of things that come out. So I think that there's now enough of a critical mass of people who understand that the goal we are seeking is not victory. The goal we are seeking is peace.
Mm.
Enough people understand that now that, well, for one thing, we've averted a war. Well, keeping my fingers crossed, but the world has been at the brink of war for a long time and it hasn't gone there. This
Mm.
is significant. I mean, there's been a lot of violence in the world and war by other means and so on and so forth. But as far as like a total war between the great powers, nope, hasn't happened. And so I think this is part of the same phenomenon that I'm talking about, like a critical mass of people who are not going to go nuclear, and who, if you're having a hard time, and maybe if it were just up to you, you would go nuclear. But now, you're having this conversation, you're having people around you who validate the part of you that does want peace, that
Yeah.
would be willing to sacrifice victory for peace, that would be willing to sacrifice. In the end, she finally admits that I was right, or the judge finally says that I was right. Or like, what if you never get to be vindicated in the end? Would you be willing to sacrifice your eventual vindication if that's what it takes for there to be peace and healing on earth? Would you be willing to sacrifice having been right all along?
Mm.
If you're willing to sacrifice that, boy, that is a very meaningful offering to put on the altar
Mm.
of peace.
That's powerful. Um, Forgive me for just jumping around to different areas, but I've just got different,
Mhm.
multiple different things. You could maybe call it selfish in a way. I started out this podcast thinking I wanted to help other people and quickly realized that I needed to do it more just to help myself. And in doing that, maybe I could more accurately help others through trying to help myself. Um, so I basically just try my best to genuinely ask things that I'm interested about.
Mhm.
And another one of those things which was really curious to me, not curious, but I just don't hear a lot of other people talk about this, is when you were talking to Russell Brand, I believe it was, the idea came up about free energy devices and these stories about, patents that have gone missing, uh and you said something to the effect of, it doesn't necessarily matter if these things are real or not. It's more about there's a psychic climate in which they can be real. And when the psychic climate is at the point where, uh, basically, kind of sounded like it could, move us into a timeline where these things are real, if you want to put it that way. And it's just something that I've sort of felt intuitively and thought about as far as, when you have groups of people together, the more people that believe in a certain thing seem to, lend itself to the possibility of that thing becoming real. And if I'm misinterpreting your statement, I'd love to hear, you explain it more accurately, but also, how much of do you feel that your work is in some ways doing that? Like you're providing a belief, you know, um, or a vision that if people are open to it, they can also sort of envision it and believe in it, and just kind of opening the doorway for the possibility of something different to come into being.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, it would take me quite some time to lay out my whole metaphysical understanding
Sure.
that you're referring to there about free energy devices and stuff. I mean, you could say that um, we're not ready for them.
Yeah.
They can only exist in a worldview of abundance.
Mm.
And we live now in a worldview of scarcity that goes all the way to the level of physics. It's not just around money and love that we're in scarcity, but physics basically says um, no energy is ever created or destroyed, and that the universe is constantly moving toward entropy, toward disorder, um, toward heat death. So free energy devices contradict that, and say that maybe energy and order can be born all the time. That
Mm.
so I'm not going to, I don't want to explore too deeply like the philosophy of science behind it, but um, one way to look at it is that what would we do if we did have access to so-called free energy devices? What would we do if they were real in consensus reality? If people generally accepted their authenticity? Uh, do you want to unleash that in humanity right now? What did we do with the last major advance in energy technology in 1945? What was the first thing we did with it? We built a
Bomb.
bomb. Yeah. Have we evolved to the point where we wouldn't use it for destruction? Have we evolved to the point where we wouldn't use it in a way that harms other life on Earth? I don't think we have reached that point. And when we do reach that point, we won't need free energy devices for the things that we think that we need them for,
Mm.
which is basically to power industrial civilization as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
If we're hoping that it's like the new uh, the refill of the gas tank of progress, that we can continue the path that we're on, um, and lay waste to even more of this planet, and continue to increase our dominance and our GDP. Um, that's not what those energies are for. That's not what those devices are for. So in a way, I kind of resonate with the people who say that these are bogus, that they don't actually exist, that they're hoaxes and frauds um, and unscientific, and they violate the laws of physics. And we should not waste our time with them when what we really need to do is to explore solar energy, which actually I'm a bit skeptical of, but
Yep.
or um, change our way of life so that we don't need more and more energy. Because this is another dimension of abundance, an abundance that doesn't depend on more and more. We've translated the true yearning of abundance, which is for qualitative things, onto quantities. We've displaced it onto things, onto stuff, onto money. But what we really want are things that are in fundamental abundance that we've made scarce, things but that are qualitative, like
Yeah.
intimacy and connection and belonging and beauty. These are things that are in short supply in modern society. And these are the true abundance is to have a wealth of these things. Even in material terms, true abundance is the freedom to be generous. If you feel free to be generous, if you feel so secure that you're willing to give your last dollar to somebody who needs it more than you, then you are truly wealthy. So until we recover that kind of abundance, which comes from connection and from belonging, like what would make you feel free to be that generous? It would be if you knew that everyone's going to take care of you too. So when we recover that, we will no longer need free energy devices or anywhere near as much electrical generation and power as we have now. You don't need that much to experience intimacy and beauty and connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that we should never, that there shouldn't be none, but probably 3/4 or 9/10 of it is not really conducive to joy on earth. So yeah, we don't need the devices for the kind of things that we're using energy for now. They do have, I believe, a purpose that almost nobody can see right now. It's totally off the radar screen.
Yeah. That's a decent segue into something that I've been now really interested in as I'm listening to your book. You got me hooked on listening to Gabe Brown give talks about regenerative agriculture.
Cool.
Yeah, he's just great to listen to, and the concepts are so fascinating. And I I guess I can understand for myself because before I really knew what it was, I didn't really think much of it. But now getting to know more about it, why do you think it's not being just implemented rapidly everywhere? Because it seems like, I don't want to say, oh, this is now we found the answer, this is it, but it seems like it could be a huge, huge part of really transforming and not really having to. I don't want to say it. We wouldn't have to change, but the changes wouldn't necessarily be. I mean, he talks about the yield of his farming being, almost the same and quality being better. And it's not like there's a huge sacrifice that has to be made. Um,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on why it's not, or we just people aren't quite ready for it yet on the mass scale?
Yeah. Uh, yeah. Gabe Brown is amazing. The maybe your listeners are familiar a little bit already, but with almost no chemicals, farming in a way that regenerates soil, um, and and restores wildlife and brings you know um, brings just as almost or maybe just as high in some cases more of a yield
Yeah.
than conventional practices, and if he had more labor, even a higher yield. um, and yeah, why isn't it being adopted at a mass scale when there's basically no downside? And I think a lot of it is habit, both the habits and
Mm.
practices of farmers and also the institutionalized habits that take the form of farm subsidies, the demands of commodity markets, the distribution infrastructure of the food industry. All of these things have a lot of inertia
Yeah.
and would have to change for us to transition to a fully regenerative system. But it is, I think, the low-hanging fruit of earth healing, whether it's from the perspective of greenhouse gases. These practices sequester enormous amounts of carbon into the soil, or from the perspective of um, biodiversity, um, the perspective of healing water, of repairing the hydrological cycle, which, as you know from reading my book, I think that damage to the hydrological cycle is actually causing a lot of the things that are blamed on global warming. Um,
Well,
so
that's what I was going to say. The two biggest things I've taken from your book so far that have just kind of blown me away in a really simple way is the soil and the water. And first of all, just the tilling of the soil, the fact that that's never happens in nature, and how it's basically like an open wound to the
mhm.
land. Um, and how much the soil is supposed to be filled with life, and how much the soil and the water have such a huge part of you know, kind of regulating the climate and
Yeah,
all of that. Um,
yeah. The soil is like the skin of the earth. Like imagine if you tilled your skin.
yeah,
Like your body would immediately try to heal it. That's what the
yeah.
earth does when the ground is broken. It immediately tries to heal it by sending in weeds.
Mm,
And then conventional agriculture then fights the weeds.
with
It's like,
chemicals.
yeah, it's like, I mean, that's another instantiation of war thinking.
So it seems so, it just seems it's so hard to believe that it continues to go on because, I think there's maybe a feeling of like, well, how else are we going to do it? We got to kill the weeds, we got to get rid of the bugs. But when it's just this reversal of like, instead of fighting against the negatives, we promote the positives. And, like Gabe Brown says, for every one, negative pest, I'll just say that to be simple, one negative pest, there's 1,700, beneficial pests that will, control the population of the negative. And it's the same with the antibiotics and probiotics, or,
Mhm.
even with mental health, it's all about trying to control the negatives and fight the negatives instead of really try to promote and put energy towards like what does work, what is working, what's thriving and alive. And I guess just listening to your book, Climate: A New Story, if I haven't said the name already, um, it just shocks me that the stuff you're talking about isn't more widely talked about and accepted, especially, you talk about a lot of things that aren't necessarily scientific that people would maybe certain people might think are woo woo or whatever, the earth being alive, the forest being organs, all the parts of the earth being organs, etc. But even from a straight up scientific, if you wanted to try to put it into the most scientific terms possible, it just makes so much more sense.
Mhm.
And I'm just kind of baffled, I guess, at why
Well, but I
maybe
think
your book might be more fringe to,
it comes down to polarization. It comes down
yeah,
to polarization because what I'm saying does not easily fit into the uh, dogma of either side. So no side can come and say, "Ha, here it is. See, this Eisenstein proves that he's on our side." No one's going to take it up as they're not going to be able to use it as ammunition in
right.
their war. So it takes longer for a book like that um, doesn't take sides and looks for what both sides aren't seeing to become to spread. It takes longer for it to spread.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I
I
think
didn't,
it's starting to have some reach now. I think.
it's good.
Yeah.
I should have, would you want to give just a brief for people who don't know about kind of how you're seeing things? I know that it's a huge, to simplify it might not do it justice, but I encourage people to check it out, and I would love people to be inspired to. So if you want to give a little bit of a rundown of kind of what the
Yeah, I
book
mean, there's a
is.
few themes. I mean, the basic theme is that Earth is alive, that it's a living being, that its organs comprise soil and water and species, uh, rainforests, seagrass meadows, coral reefs, the whales, the fish. These are all organs. And that if we continue to degrade the organs, it doesn't matter if we have greenhouse gas emissions or not. If we continue to degrade the organs, the planet will die of organ failure. And if we can protect and regenerate the organs, then the challenge of greenhouse gases will be easy for life to take care of, because the principle of Gaia is that life creates the conditions for life. So that's one theme. And I do, draw on a lot of science to support that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff on the what I call actually it's not my term, but the new water paradigm that and I go, it's like, for example, like some of the stuff we've talked about in this interview, the go-to patterns of problem solving. The one that we talked about was to find the enemy, or another one was to do the math, like find some way to quantify the problem, and that's how you address it. Or another way is to find the cause, which is related to war thinking. Find the one thing to fight. And so it's global warming. Okay, we can fight global warming, the one thing that causes everything. So we see like all these problems on Earth getting blamed on global warming, whether it's fires in Australia or immigration into Europe. These are all blamed on global warming. And there's a comfort in that, but it denies the complexity of the world. And it obscures other causes that may be actually more critical, yet more inconvenient to look at, more uncomfortable to look at. And one of those is water. And then there's other stuff too about the relationship between the global climate and the political climate and the psychic climate. This connection between inner and outer, and between self and other, and just this gut feeling that as long as we are exploiting the most vulnerable people in society, we're going to be exploiting the most vulnerable places too.
Yeah.
Like, social healing and ecological healing are inseparable, which means that if you are called to be a force for healing in the world, even if it doesn't look like you're saving the planet, you actually are contributing to the healing of the planet, even if your work has nothing to do with the environment, even if it is, working with prisoners or homeless people or in your family or in your community. Any healing is part of all healing. And I feel like this is a really important truth to convey to people, because it counteracts the despair that comes from, no matter what I do, it isn't going to matter because the world is screwed. That's not, that view, that despair depends on an understanding of how change happens that is actually part of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to something I, kind of towards the end wanted to ask you, which is, what do you feel are, I know you shy away from giving any type of prescription, but going off of what you just said, it's sort of like, what can people do right now that might make a difference, whether that's not even a thing to do, but maybe a way of being or a way of feeling or a perspective to have. I mean, you kind of already said in some ways, but maybe if there's more to say there.
I would say that you're here. Everybody listening to this is here for the same reason that the weeds are here. In a general sense, like
calling me a weed.
Yeah, like you plow up the land, or there's a fire, and the first thing that happens on damaged land is that weeds come. They're perfectly suited for that situation. They grow really fast. They shoot their roots out. They hold the soil down. They prepare the land for more complex ecosystems to succeed them. The weeds have a purpose, and their purpose is to contribute to the aliveness of this planet, which could be the healing of this planet or the evolution of this planet. So you are here for the same purpose, to help create and maintain the conditions for life to grow, for Earth to become more and more alive, which has been happening for billions of years. Human beings are created for the same reason that all other species have been created, to make the world even more alive. And you, as a person, all of us, we're here for that purpose as well. So if you bring your life into alignment with that purpose, and are in service to the healing and aliveness of the world, you're gonna recognize that you're doing what you're here to do. You're gonna feel good. You're gonna feel like, yep, I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Even if your mind can't say how this is important given global warming or something like that, you're gonna feel that you are aligned with your purpose. So all I want is for people to embrace the truth of that, to identify the truth of that, to feel, yeah, that is true. And I know that that's true. And not even to have to say, therefore, I am going to quit my job, or therefore, I am going to do this or that or the other thing. You don't need to prematurely leave that energy of the resonance of truth and jump to some action plan. The action will come from it. Action plans will probably come from it. But, in this moment, I would just invite people to resonate with the truth. It's undeniable that you are here in service to life, whatever form that takes.
Thank you. We're at about an hour. Is that the amount of time that you had, I'm assuming?
Roughly?
Yeah,
I mean, I'm kind of getting hungry. So,
cool.
yeah.
Well, maybe one more thing I would ask you for my own curiosity is, and I don't want to ask this to put you on the spot or to make you, feel weird at all, but I just feel like there's so much focus in social media and in interviews and all this stuff on like, what are your great ideas? How are you maybe better than everybody else? Or what's your shiny thing that you have? And I'm just curious, like, what are your challenges right now? Or where do you feel like you're stuck in the old story? Or, I guess just for people who might look to you as some sort of, like you put it, evolved being or somebody who's, just found something. Obviously, you definitely, to me, have wisdom, and I look to you for that wisdom. But I guess where do you feel like you're still stuck, or what are you finding to be challenging for you right now?
Yeah, a question like that when I'm speaking to people I don't even know, um, my temptation would be to name something that doesn't actually sound that bad, something that isn't really uh, cutting to the bone.
Sure.
Um, and the problem with doing that is it makes me seem all the more perfect or all the more admirable. So I'll just say, like, I have my challenges and things that I would be ashamed to confess to,
Yeah.
that I would not want to confess to unless I felt really, really safe,
Mm.
and I was with somebody who I deeply trusted and could hold me through the shame.
Mm.
Shame is not a bad thing. Only when it's weaponized
Mm.
is it a bad thing. Shame is the feeling of exposure of inner contradiction between the image you have of yourself and the reality. Um, so, yeah, I don't think I want to engage in that exercise.
Yeah.
I just feel like if I did, I would end up naming something that isn't actually so bad. And um, but we're all human here together. I
Yeah.
do say and write some beautiful things that then become my own teacher. It's not like, I'm the master who has fully integrated everything that I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm tuning into a future, tuning into a possibility. And, um, it's the knowledge is, I don't know where it comes from, but I am just as much its student and not its master as, anybody else out there. Um, and I would also say that the things that I'm talking about are emerging in various forms everywhere. It's
Mm.
not like I'm the one who's bringing it. It's a water table that's rising and bubbling forth from
Yeah.
many springs.
Mm.
That's the way it is.
Yeah. Well, I didn't had definitely didn't want to put you on the spot there and have you feel like you pressured to reveal some sort of shameful thing, but your answer is great and I appreciate that because I I always enjoy when I, you know, feel that sense of we're all in this together and the humanity of, I don't know, I don't think you're super into social media. In fact, I know you're not, but that is sort of part of the world we live in now, it seems, is everybody wants to show their best self, and kind of shy away from the ugly bits. So I appreciate that. But yeah, you're that reminded me of your course, Space Between Stories course I've been taking, and you said
Mhm.
in one of the intros is you made the course for other people, and you said something about you got to be careful what you make courses on because after making it, you ended up uh, kind of going into one of the
Mhm.
biggest space between stories experiences. And that's something I've experienced through this podcast as well. I started out sharing some stuff about, kind of ways to go through loneliness and anxiety and these difficult feelings. And then shortly after, it was like, okay, you want to learn some more about that?
Mhm.
And I sort of ended up going through a period of that, or still
Mhm.
am. So I can relate to that. But yeah, Charles, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well.
Awesome. Yeah, it means a lot to me. Um, and again, your book, I highly recommend it. I just think it's great. Is there anything else you want to share? Any parting messages or thoughts?
Now I think I said the things that I wanted to say. Not that
Yeah.
I had them planned in advance, but I
Yeah.
feel I feel complete.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. I'd love to do it again whenever, anytime.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Jacob.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, take care.
You too.
All right.